chains rattled in the dark, and a growl tore through the stone chamber before anyone could stop it. Kieran, the Alpha King of the Ashwood territory, pulled against the silver-lined bindings that burned his wrists with every movement. Smoke curled from his skin where the metal touched him, and his wolf howled somewhere deep inside, trapped and furious. 3 days had passed since the witch Mira had captured him in a trap disguised as a peace meeting, and every hour that ticked by weakened him further. His pack did not know where he was. His enemies were already spreading rumors that their king had fled his throne like a coward. Mira circled him slowly, her staff tapping against the floor, and she smiled the way people smile when they already know they have won. "You will stay here until someone is willing to give up everything for you," she said. "That is the price. Not gold, not land, a life, traded whole, for yours." Kieran laughed, though the sound was rough and broken. "No one gives up everything for a king they have never met." "You would be surprised," Mira answered, "what people are willing to lose." Miles away, in a small village bordering the forest, a young woman named Elena knelt beside a wounded deer, coaxing it gently with soft words and steady hands, until it calmed enough to let her check its leg. She was not like the others in her pack. She preferred solitude, the company of injured animals, and the quiet hush of trees over the noise of pack gatherings. Her golden brown eyes, sharp and alert, missed nothing, though most people mistook her calm nature for shyness. She had heard the whispers spreading through the village that morning, carried on frightened voices from traders passing through. The Alpha King was missing, and a witch was holding him somewhere in the deep woods, demanding an impossible price for his release. Elena did not know Kieran. She had never stood before his throne or spoken his name aloud, but her pack lived under his protection, and without him, the borders would fall to rival packs who had wanted this land for generations. If the king disappeared, so would every home behind her, every child asleep in this village, every elder who depended on the safety his rule provided. She told herself this was the only reason she followed the trader's directions into the forest that night, moving quietly between the trees toward the place where fear and rumor said the witch made her home. The forest grew colder the deeper she walked, the moonlight thinning, until only silver threads slipped between the branches. She found the witch's dwelling exactly where the stories said it would be, tucked into a hollow surrounded by black candles that never seemed to go out. Mira was waiting for her, as though she had known Elena was coming long before Elena knew it herself. "You are not the first to come," Mira said, studying her with unreadable eyes. "But you may be the first who means it." "I want to know the price," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, despite the way her heart pounded against her ribs. "For the king's freedom." Mira's smile did not reach her eyes. A wolf's whole form, given willingly, forever. No shifting again. No claws, no speed. No strength beyond what any ordinary human carries. You will still breathe. You will still walk this earth. But the wolf inside you will be gone, as if it never existed. Elena felt the weight of those words settle over her like a stone dropped into still water. Her wolf was not simply a shape she could change into. It was memory, instinct, family, history stretching back through every ancestor who had run beneath these same trees. To lose it meant losing herself, in ways she could not fully imagine, not until it was already done. "Why would anyone agree to that?" she whispered, more to herself than to the witch. "Because some people believe a king's life is worth more than their own comfort," Mira said, "and because you already decided the answer before you knocked on my door. You only came here to hear me say it out loud." Elena closed her eyes. She thought of her village, of the families who trusted a leader they might never personally meet, of a kingdom that could crumble into chaos and war if the wrong people seized power in the king's absence. She thought too of her own life, small and quiet, tucked away from the ambitions and politics of pack leadership. Perhaps that was exactly why she could make this choice. She had little to lose that the world would notice, and everything to gain if it meant sparing others from suffering. "I accept," she said, before her fear could talk her out of it. Mira's staff struck the ground once, and the black candles flared brighter, casting long shadows that danced against the trees. "Then give me your hand." Elena stepped forward and extended her palm, trying not to let it shake. The witch's fingers were cold as she traced a symbol into Elena's skin, murmuring words in a language that felt older than the forest itself. A sharp, searing pain shot through Elena's chest, as though something vital were being carefully unstitched from where it had always lived inside her. She gasped, stumbling backward, and pressed a hand to her chest as the pain radiated outward, down her arms, into her fingertips, until it reached every corner of her body at once. The world around her blurred. She felt her wolf stir one final time, a low, mournful sound rising from somewhere deep within her, before it went silent. Completely, permanently silent. She had heard stories of wolves losing their second form through injury or curse, but nothing had prepared her for the hollow ache that followed, the sense of a door closing on a room she would never enter again. When her vision cleared, Mira was watching her with something that might have been respect, or might simply have been curiosity at how far a person would go for a stranger. "It is done," the witch said. "The king is free. He will wake in the forest by morning, with no memory of who freed him, only that he was freed." "Why no memory?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse. "Because that is how the magic works," Mira replied simply. "A sacrifice given for recognition is not a true sacrifice. It becomes a trade, a transaction, something owed. This must remain a gift, freely given, unclaimed." Elena nodded slowly, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of vanishing so completely from the story of her own sacrifice. She turned to leave, unsteady on legs that felt strange now, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with relief. "Wait," Mira called after her. "There is one more part of the price. Your eyes will remain gold, brighter than before, marked permanently by the magic that moved through you. Wherever you go, people will notice. They may ask questions you cannot answer honestly. Consider it the last piece of what you gave away." Elena touched her face, though she could not see her own reflection in the darkness of the forest. She thought of the quiet, unnoticed life she had lived until now, and understood that part of that life, too, had ended tonight. She walked home slowly, the forest path unfamiliar beneath her human feet, every step reminding her of speed she no longer possessed, senses that no longer sharpened at the scent of danger, strength that no longer lived beneath her skin waiting to be called upon. By the time she reached the edge of her village, dawn was breaking over the trees, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She should have felt proud. She should have felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing a king now walked free, because of a choice only she had made. Instead, she felt strangely empty, as though she had given away a piece of herself that no one would ever know to thank her for. Deep in the forest, exactly as Mira had promised, Kieran woke among a scattering of fallen leaves, his wrists free of chains, the silver burns already beginning to heal beneath his skin. He sat up slowly, disoriented, searching his memory for any explanation of how he had escaped Mira's chamber. There was nothing. No image of an ally arriving to save him, no memory of breaking free through his own strength, only a strange, lingering warmth in his chest, as though someone had stood close enough to change the course of his fate, and then stepped quietly away before he could turn and see their face. He rose to his feet, testing his strength, relieved to feel his wolf stir easily beneath his skin, powerful and unrestrained, exactly as it should be. Someone had paid a price to make this possible. He could sense it in the strange stillness of the forest around him, in the way the trees themselves seemed to hold their breath. He did not yet know who. He did not yet know what they had given up, but he made a silent vow, standing alone among the trees as morning light broke fully over the horizon, that he would find out, no matter how long the search took him, and repay a debt he did not yet understand the full weight of. Neither of them knew, in that quiet moment, separated by miles of forest and an entire kingdom's worth of secrets, that their paths were already beginning to bend toward one another, pulled by a thread neither could see. Tied the night a girl with golden eyes decided a stranger's life was worth more than her own. News of the king's return spread through Ashwood territory within a single day, carried by messengers on horseback and whispered excitedly between neighbors at market stalls. Kieran resumed his throne with a renewed sense of purpose, doubling patrols along the border and tightening security around the palace grounds, determined never to be caught so unprepared again. Yet beneath the surface of his restored authority, a quiet unease lingered. He found himself staring too long at strangers with unusual features, listening too closely to rumors of unexplained disappearances near the forest, searching every face he passed for some sign of recognition that never came. Elena, meanwhile, returned to a life that no longer fit the way it once had. Her family noticed the change in her eyes almost immediately, the deep, warm gold replacing what had once been ordinary brown, and though she offered a vague explanation about an encounter with strange herbs in the forest, she could see doubt lingering behind their concerned expressions. Worse than the questions was the silence that followed whenever she reached for her wolf and found nothing there to answer her call. She had known, in theory, what the sacrifice would cost her. Living it, day after day, was an entirely different kind of understanding. Word eventually reached her that the king had survived, that he now sat safely on his throne, unaware of the young woman in a quiet village who had traded away her entire nature so that his story could continue. Elena told herself this was enough. She had done what needed to be done, and the king's safety was proof that her sacrifice had not been wasted. She did not expect gratitude. She did not expect recognition. She only hoped, in the private corners of her heart she rarely allowed herself to visit, that somewhere far away, a king who would never know her name was living a life worth the price she had paid for it. She could not have known, standing at the edge of her village, with the morning sun catching strangely in her golden eyes, that fate rarely allowed such quiet sacrifices to remain hidden forever, and that somewhere beyond the trees, a king's restless search was only just beginning. A month passed, and Elena's village stopped whispering about strange herbs and started whispering about her instead. She noticed the way conversations paused when she walked into a room, the way her brother Owen watched her a little too carefully during pack runs, as if waiting for her to shift and prove herself normal again. She never did. She could not. On the night of the full moon, when every wolf in the village answered the pull of the sky and ran together through the trees, Elena stayed behind, sitting alone on her porch, listening to the distant howls of a family she no longer fully belonged to. "You could tell them the truth," Owen said one evening, finding her outside long after the others had returned from their run, breathless and glowing, with the satisfaction only a shift could bring. They would understand. Would they? Elena asked. Or would they see a woman who gave away the one thing that made her part of this pack, and start treating me like a stranger wearing a familiar face? Owen did not have an answer for that, and his silence told her everything she needed to know. She loved her brother, but even he could not fully grasp what it meant to wake every morning and reach instinctively for a strength that no longer existed inside her. She stopped attending pack gatherings after that, choosing instead to spend her days tending the small garden behind her house and helping the village healer prepare remedies for illnesses and injuries. It was quiet work, unglamorous work, but it gave her hands something to do while her mind wrestled with the person she had become. The village healer, a sharp-eyed woman named Grace, noticed Elena's gold eyes without ever asking about them directly. Instead, she simply began teaching Elena everything she knew about herbs, wound care, and the delicate art of easing pain, without magic or strength, only patience and knowledge. "Some of the best healers I ever trained were humans, living among wolves," Grace told her one afternoon, grinding dried petals into a fine powder. "Strength is not the only thing worth having, Elena. Sometimes steady hands and a clear mind save more lives than claws ever could." Elena clung to those words in the weeks that followed, using them to rebuild a version of herself that did not depend on what she had lost. She grew skilled quickly. Her calm nature suited perfectly to the careful, unhurried work of healing. When a trader's wagon overturned on the road outside the village, crushing a young boy's leg beneath a splintered wheel, it was Elena who kept him calm, while Grace set the bone, her voice steady even as the boy cried out in pain. When fever swept through 3 households during a cold snap, it was Elena who spent sleepless nights changing cool cloths and murmuring reassurances until the worst of it passed. Slowly, without realizing it, she began to matter to her village again, not despite what she had lost, but through what she had chosen to build in its place. Still, restlessness lived beneath her calm exterior. She often found herself staring toward the horizon in the direction of the king's territory, wondering, in quiet, unguarded moments, whether Kieran had found peace after his return, whether the kingdom remained safe, whether any part of him ever sensed the sacrifice that had freed him. She told herself these thoughts were foolish. A king had no reason to think of a healer's assistant from a small border village, and she had no reason to expect otherwise. Yet the wondering persisted, stubborn and quiet, refusing to fully fade. Her chance to see that world for herself arrived without warning, carried on the back of tragedy. A sickness unlike anything Grace had treated before began spreading through several villages near the forest's edge, moving faster than herbs and rest could manage, leaving its victims weak, feverish, and covered in strange dark markings along their arms. Grace exhausted every remedy she knew within a week, and when a messenger from the royal healers arrived seeking anyone with knowledge of forest herbs and border village illnesses, Grace did not hesitate to recommend Elena for the journey to the palace. "You know these plants better than healers twice your age," Grace told her, packing a satchel of dried herbs and instructions with brisk, efficient movements. "The king's healers need help, and you have skill worth sharing. Go." Elena hesitated only briefly before agreeing, telling herself the decision had nothing to do with the small, persistent hope that she might catch a glimpse of the king she had freed. The journey to the palace took 2 full days by wagon, winding through unfamiliar roads and past towns larger than any she had visited before. By the time the palace gates rose into view, tall and imposing against the afternoon sky, Elena felt smaller than she had in weeks, painfully aware of her plain traveling clothes and the satchel of herbs that suddenly felt like an inadequate offering compared to the grandeur surrounding her. She was led quickly to the royal healing wing, a bright, orderly space filled with the sharp scent of medicine and the quiet urgency of healers moving between patients. The head healer, a stern older man named Edmund who also served as one of the king's most trusted advisors, questioned her briefly about her knowledge, before setting her to work preparing remedies for the sickness that had already claimed several palace guards, and even threatened members of the royal household. Elena worked tirelessly through the following days, grinding herbs, boiling remedies, and applying poultices with the same steady focus she had learned from Grace. She barely noticed the passage of time, absorbed entirely in the work, until the afternoon, a commotion near the healing wing's entrance pulled her attention away from the mixture she was preparing. "The king insists on seeing the patients himself," a guard was explaining, clearly exasperated. "He will not be dissuaded." Elena straightened, just as Kieran strode into the room, dressed simply despite his station, his expression tight with concern for his people. She had never seen him before, not clearly, not up close, yet something in her chest recognized him instantly, a strange pull she could not fully explain. He moved through the room checking on patients, speaking quietly with each of them, offering reassurance without a hint of the distance most rulers kept between themselves and those they governed. Then his eyes found hers. He stopped mid-step, his gaze locking onto her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the noise of the healing wing fading into an uncomfortable, charged silence. "Your eyes," he said finally, his voice quieter than she expected. "I have never seen that color before." Elena forced herself to hold his gaze, though every instinct urged her to look away, to hide, to protect the secret she had carried alone for weeks. "A trick of birth, Your Majesty." Nothing more. Something flickered across his expression, too quick for her to read clearly, gone before she could name it. He studied her a moment longer, as though searching for something just out of reach, before Edmund cleared his throat and drew his attention back toward a patient requiring urgent care. Kieran moved on, but Elena could feel his gaze return to her more than once throughout the remainder of the day, curious and searching, in a way that left her both unsettled and, despite every effort to resist it, quietly thrilled. She told herself it meant nothing. Kings noticed unusual things. That was simply the nature of curiosity. But that night, lying awake in the small chamber provided to visiting healers, she found herself replaying the moment their eyes had met, wondering what exactly he had seen in her gaze that made him stop so suddenly, and wondering too, dangerously, whether some buried instinct in him recognized more than he consciously understood. Neither of them could have guessed, in that first charged exchange within the healing wing, that a bond forged in secrecy and sacrifice was already beginning to stir awake, refusing to remain buried, no matter how carefully one of them had tried to bury it. The sickness in the palace healing wing began to ease within the week, thanks in large part to a remedy Elena remembered from Grace's teachings, a combination of forest roots that neutralized the strange dark markings spreading across patients' skin. Edmund praised her skill openly, recommending to the king that she remain at the palace as a permanent healer rather than returning to her small border village. Elena accepted the offer, before fully considering the consequences, telling herself it was simply a practical decision, better pay and better resources for her healing work, nothing more. She knew, even as she told herself this, that it was only part of the truth. Kieran found reasons to visit the healing wing more often than his duties strictly required. always arriving with some minor complaint or excuse. A headache that never seemed particularly severe. Questions about herbal remedies he could easily have asked Edmund instead. Elena noticed the pattern quickly, and though she told herself to remain professional and distant, she found herself looking forward to his visits more than she was willing to admit, even to herself in the privacy of her own thoughts. "You never talk about your village," he said one afternoon, watching her carefully measure dried petals into a small bowl. "Most people who come to the palace cannot stop talking about home, missing it, comparing it constantly to life here." "There is not much to tell," Elena replied, keeping her focus on her work. "A small village, quiet life, nothing worth a king's interest." "I disagree," Kieran said, leaning against the wooden table nearby, his presence somehow filling the entire room, despite his casual posture. "Everything about you seems worth interest, healer. Your skill, your calm, even when patients scream in pain. Your eyes, which I still cannot explain." Elena's hands stilled briefly, before she forced them to continue their steady rhythm. "Perhaps some things are simply unexplainable, Your Majesty." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "When we are alone, you may call me Kieran." She glanced up at him then, startled by the informality, by the warmth in his gaze that seemed entirely genuine, rather than the practiced charm she expected from someone in his position. "That would not be appropriate." "Perhaps not," he agreed, though his expression suggested he had no intention of retracting the offer. "But I find myself caring less about appropriateness than I once did, since my time in that witch's chamber. Captivity changes a person's priorities, Elena. It makes you realize how little time any of us actually have to say the things that matter." The mention of the witch sent a sharp jolt through her chest, and she kept her eyes carefully fixed on her work, terrified that even a flicker of reaction might reveal more than she intended. "I am glad you were freed, Your Majesty. The kingdom needs you." "I still do not know who freed me," Kieran said quietly, his voice losing some of its earlier warmth, replaced by something heavier, more contemplative. "I have searched for months, questioned every ally, every soldier, every servant who might have organized a rescue. No one claims responsibility. It is as though whoever saved me simply vanished afterward, asking for nothing, wanting no recognition." Elena's throat tightened. She forced herself to speak, choosing her words with painstaking care. Perhaps they had their reasons for remaining unknown. "Perhaps," Kieran agreed, studying her with an intensity that made her wonder, uncomfortably, whether he suspected something he could not yet name. "But I intend to find them eventually. Whoever they are, they gave up something enormous to secure my freedom. I can feel it, somehow, in the way the forest itself seemed to hold its breath the morning I woke free of those chains. A debt like that deserves to be repaid, whether the person wants recognition or not." Elena said nothing further, afraid that any additional words might betray the secret she had guarded so carefully for months. Kieran eventually left the healing wing, called away by pressing matters of state, but his words lingered in her mind long after his departure, tangled uncomfortably with the growing awareness of feelings she had no right to entertain toward a king who did not know the truth of what stood between them. Their conversations continued over the following weeks, growing longer, more relaxed, occasionally drifting into laughter that surprised them both with its easy familiarity. Kieran began seeking her opinion on matters entirely unrelated to healing, asking about her thoughts on border disputes, harvest concerns, even the simple pleasures of village festivals she remembered from childhood. Elena found herself opening up more than she intended, drawn in by his genuine curiosity and the surprising humility with which he approached their conversations, so different from the distant, commanding presence she had expected from a king. Other members of the palace staff began to notice the shift as well. Nora, the palace kitchen keeper who often brought meals to the healing wing during Elena's long working hours, teased her gently about the king's frequent visits, though Elena always deflected with practiced ease. Edmund watched the growing friendship with a more cautious expression, occasionally offering pointed reminders about the difference in their stations, the political complications that could arise from a king showing favor toward a healer of unknown lineage. Elena understood his concerns better than he realized. She knew, more acutely than anyone else in the palace could possibly understand, exactly how complicated her connection to Kieran truly was. Every conversation they shared, every moment of easy laughter or quiet understanding between them, existed in the shadow of a secret she had sworn never to reveal. She had traded away her wolf form to save his life, and the terms of that trade demanded her silence, forever, regardless of whatever feelings might grow between them in the years that followed. Yet despite her best efforts to maintain careful distance, she found the boundaries blurring more each day. Kieran's presence had become something she anticipated rather than merely tolerated. His laughter, something she found herself missing during the hours he remained occupied with royal duties elsewhere in the palace. She recognized the danger in these feelings even as she failed to fully resist them, aware that whatever connection was forming between them rested on a foundation of secrecy that could shatter everything the moment the truth surfaced, if it ever did. Late one evening, working alone in the healing wing after most of the palace had settled into sleep, Elena heard familiar footsteps approaching and looked up to find Kieran standing in the doorway, his expression unusually serious. "I received word today," he said, closing the door quietly behind him, "that the witch who held me captive has resurfaced near the eastern border, causing trouble among the villages there. My advisors want me to send soldiers to deal with her permanently." Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of trouble? Threats, mostly. Demands for tribute from villages too frightened to refuse her. "But there are also rumors," Kieran continued, watching Elena carefully as he spoke, "that she has been telling stories about the price of my freedom. About a trade made the night I escaped her chamber. She claims to know exactly who saved me, and what they sacrificed." Elena felt the room tilt slightly around her, her carefully maintained composure threatening to crack under the sudden weight of dread settling into her chest. "Stories from a witch trying to cause chaos should not be trusted easily, Your Majesty." "Kieran," he corrected again, softer this time, stepping closer. "And you are right. Ordinarily, I would dismiss such claims as manipulation, but something about the timing troubles me. She resurfaces, spreading these particular rumors, exactly during the months I have grown closer to you than to anyone else within these palace walls." His gaze held hers, searching, uncertain, yet somehow already sensing truths he could not fully articulate. "Elena, is there something you have not told me?" The question hung heavy in the quiet room, and Elena understood, with sudden painful clarity, that the secret she had carried so carefully for months was no longer entirely hers to control. Elena stood frozen for a long moment, torn between the promise of silence she had made to protect herself and the growing certainty that continuing to hide the truth would cost her something far more valuable than secrecy ever could. Kieran waited, his expression patient despite the tension visible in the tight set of his shoulders, giving her space to answer honestly, rather than pressing further. "There is something," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I have never told anyone, not fully, not even my own family." "Tell me," Kieran said gently, though the request carried the quiet weight of someone who already suspected the answer would change everything between them. Elena drew a steadying breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly, rather than retreating into the safety of looking away. "The night you disappeared, before news of your capture spread through the kingdoms, I overheard traders discussing the witch's demands. I did not know you personally. I had never stood before your throne or exchanged a single word with you, but my village existed under your protection, and I understood, even then, what losing you would mean for everyone I loved." She paused, watching his expression carefully, searching for any sign that she should stop before revealing more. He said nothing, simply waited, his golden brown eyes fixed intently on hers. "I went into the forest that night," Elena continued, "and found the witch's dwelling exactly where the rumors said it would be. I asked her the price of your freedom." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed forward, refusing to let the truth remain buried any longer. "She told me it required a wolf's entire form, given willingly and permanently. No shifting again, no strength beyond what any ordinary human possesses. I agreed to the trade before I fully understood what it would cost me." Kieran's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession, confusion giving way to disbelief, disbelief slowly transforming into stunned realization as the pieces of months of unexplained rescue finally clicked into place. "Your eyes," he said quietly, understanding dawning with painful clarity. "The gold color. It is not a trick of birth at all." "No," Elena confirmed, tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, despite her efforts to remain composed. "It is the mark the magic left behind. A permanent reminder of what I gave up. I have not shifted since that night, Kieran. I never will again. My wolf is gone completely, as though it never existed at all." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy between them, filled with everything neither of them yet knew how to say. Kieran closed the remaining distance between them slowly, his hands reaching to cup her face with a gentleness that contradicted the storm of emotion visible in his eyes. "You gave up everything," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not fully name, "for someone you had never even met. Someone who could not even remember your face afterward, who spent months searching desperately for answers you kept carefully hidden from everyone around you." "I did not do it for recognition," Elena said softly. "I did it because it needed to be done, and because I believed your life was worth protecting, even at that cost." "You should have told me," Kieran said, though there was no anger in his tone, only a deep, aching regret. "I could have found a way to help you. I could have thanked you properly, honored what you sacrificed, instead of leaving you to carry that burden entirely alone." "The witch's terms forbid recognition," Elena explained. She said the magic required silence, that claiming credit would undo the nature of the gift itself. "I did not know if breaking that silence would somehow reverse what I had done, or cause you harm in some way I could not predict." Kieran's jaw tightened, a flash of protective anger passing briefly across his features. "Then we will find a way around her terms, or force her to release you from whatever remains of this bargain entirely. You should not spend the rest of your life paying a price, that silent obligation extracted from you without proper consent to its full consequences." Elena wanted to believe that possibility existed, wanted desperately to hope that some solution might restore what she had lost, or at least free her from the isolation that had defined the months since her sacrifice. Yet doubt lingered stubbornly beneath her hope, born from months of watching Mira demonstrate exactly how carefully she guarded the terms of her magic, how little patience she showed for anyone who attempted to challenge the price she demanded. "The rumors you mentioned," Elena said, forcing her thoughts back toward the immediate danger rather than distant hopes. "If Mira is spreading stories about the trade, threatening to reveal what happened, what does she intend to gain from it?" "Chaos, likely," Kieran said grimly. "If word spreads that a common villager sacrificed everything to save a king who remained unaware of the debt for months, it could damage trust between the crown and the packs who depend on our protection. It could also paint you as a target, Elena, for anyone seeking to exploit what you gave up, or anyone who believes such sacrifice deserves punishment rather than honor within pack traditions that value strength above all else." The warning settled uncomfortably in Elena's chest, and she found herself thinking suddenly of her own village, of Owen's protective concern, of the whispered conversations that had already begun the moment her eyes changed color. If Mira's rumors spread further, reaching ears less sympathetic than her own family, the consequences could extend far beyond simple social discomfort. "We need to confront her directly," Kieran said, his tone shifting into the decisive authority Elena recognized from watching him manage crises within the palace. "Not with soldiers seeking to destroy her, which would only provoke retaliation, but with a clear demand that she cease spreading these rumors and release Elena from any remaining obligation tied to the original trade. She will not agree easily," Elena warned. "Witches like Mira thrive on leverage, on maintaining control over the bargains they create. She will not simply release me because you ask politely." "Then we offer her something else," Kieran said, already turning the problem over with the same strategic focus he applied to matters of state. "Something she values more than the leverage she currently holds over both of us. I do not yet know what that might be, but I refuse to accept that no solution exists." Elena studied him carefully, moved, despite herself, by the fierce determination in his expression, the genuine desire to protect her that seemed to override every political consideration Edmund would surely raise regarding the wisdom of a king personally confronting a dangerous witch on behalf of a healer, with no formal standing within pack hierarchy. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked quietly, needing to understand the depth of what she was witnessing, before allowing herself to hope for more than simple gratitude. Kieran's expression softened, the fierce determination giving way to something gentler, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him display. "Because somewhere over these past months, without either of us fully realizing it, you became more important to me than the debt I owed my unknown rescuer. I do not simply want to repay a sacrifice, Elena. I want to protect the woman who made it, because the thought of losing you now, after everything, terrifies me more than any threat Mira could possibly pose." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded, and Elena felt something long buried beneath months of careful secrecy, finally begin to loosen within her chest. She had convinced herself, throughout the quiet weeks of their growing friendship, that whatever she felt toward Kieran existed only as one-sided foolishness, a healer's misplaced admiration for a king who could never truly see her as an equal. His words now suggested otherwise, opening a possibility she had never allowed herself to fully consider. "We should speak with Edmund," she said finally, forcing herself back toward practical concerns, despite the way her heart pounded against her ribs. "If we intend to confront Mira, we cannot do so carelessly. Whatever bargain we hope to strike with her will require careful planning." Kieran nodded, though he did not immediately step back, his hands still resting gently against her face. "Tomorrow, we plan. Tonight, I simply want you to know that whatever happens next, you are no longer carrying this burden alone." Edmund's reaction the following morning was exactly as cautious as Elena had anticipated, his weathered face creasing with concern as Kieran laid out the truth of Elena's sacrifice and his intention to confront Mira personally. "Your Majesty, involving yourself directly with that witch again is precisely the kind of risk your advisors have spent months trying to prevent. She nearly destroyed you once already." "Which is exactly why I cannot send soldiers in my place," Kieran replied firmly. "Mira responds to power and leverage, not force. If I arrive with an army, she will simply retreat further into hiding, and Elena will remain vulnerable to whatever rumors she chooses to spread from wherever she disappears to next." Edmund's gaze shifted toward Elena, softening slightly as he studied her with newfound respect. "You truly gave up your wolf form for a king you had never met." "I did," Elena confirmed, holding his gaze steadily, despite the vulnerability of having her secret now known by yet another person within the palace. "That is not a small thing," Edmund said quietly, something like admiration entering his tone for the first time since Elena had arrived at the palace. Most pack members, even seasoned warriors, would hesitate to make such a sacrifice for their own family, let alone a stranger. The conversation that followed stretched through most of the morning, the three of them working carefully through possible approaches to confronting Mira, weighing the risks of various strategies against the urgent need to silence the rumors before they spread further and endangered Elena's safety. They eventually settled on a plan involving a small, carefully chosen group: Kieran, Elena, Edmund, and a handful of trusted guards, led by a steady, level-headed soldier named Daniel, traveling to the eastern border, where Mira had reportedly been sighted, seeking a negotiation rather than a confrontation. News of their planned journey reached unwelcome ears sooner than anyone anticipated. Callum, the alpha of a rival pack bordering Ashwood territory who had long sought opportunities to weaken Kieran's standing among the packs, arrived at the palace uninvited, just as the group prepared to depart, his expression carrying the smug satisfaction of someone who believed he held valuable information. "I hear troubling rumors," Callum said, his tone deceptively casual as he surveyed the gathered group with calculating eyes. "Something about a king who owes his freedom to a common healer's sacrifice, and now travels to confront the witch responsible for revealing such an inconvenient truth." "Rumors are rarely worth the breath spent repeating them," Kieran replied evenly, though tension visibly tightened his shoulders at Callum's unwelcome interruption. "Perhaps," Callum said, his gaze shifting deliberately toward Elena, lingering on her golden eyes with obvious calculation. "But if this particular rumor proves true, it raises interesting questions about the strength of Ashwood's leadership. A king who required rescue by an ordinary human woman, unable even to protect himself against a single witch's trap. The packs who follow you, out of respect for your strength, might reconsider that respect once they learn the full story." "You would spread lies about my rescue to weaken my standing," Kieran said, his voice hardening into the commanding tone Elena had heard him use only rarely, during moments requiring absolute authority. "This is precisely the kind of manipulation Mira hopes to provoke." "I need spread nothing," Callum replied smoothly. "The truth alone, once it fully surfaces, will accomplish exactly what I need, without any further effort from me. I simply came to offer a warning, king to king. Resolve this quietly, quickly, before the story grows beyond your ability to control it, or accept the consequences when your pack's confidence in your leadership begins to waver." He left without waiting for a response, his departure carrying the same calculated confidence that had marked his arrival, leaving behind a heavier sense of urgency than had existed before his interruption. Elena watched Kieran's expression carefully, noting the tightly controlled anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. Understanding now that her sacrifice, meant purely as an act of protection, had inadvertently created a vulnerability that threatened not only her own safety, but the stability of Kieran's entire kingdom. "This is my fault," she said quietly, once Callum's footsteps had faded from earshot. "If I had never intervened, none of this would exist for Callum to exploit." "No," Kieran said firmly, turning to face her directly. "This is Callum's fault, for choosing to twist an act of remarkable courage into a weapon against me. Your sacrifice saved my life, Elena. I refuse to let anyone, including you, reframe that truth into something shameful, simply because ambitious rivals seek advantage from it." Their journey toward the eastern border began that same afternoon, the small group moving swiftly along forest paths that grew increasingly unfamiliar as they traveled further from the safety of Ashwood territory. Elena rode alongside Kieran for much of the journey, grateful for Daniel's steady presence at the rear of their group, and Edmund's careful attention to the political implications of every decision they made along the way. The forest grew colder and darker the closer they came to the region where Mira had reportedly established her new dwelling. The same unsettling stillness Elena remembered from the night of her original trade, beginning to press against her senses once again. They found Mira exactly where scouts had indicated, settled into a hollow, surrounded by the same black candles that never seemed to extinguish, her expression carrying obvious satisfaction as she watched their group approach through the trees. "The king himself," she said, her voice carrying amusement rather than surprise. And the healer with golden eyes returned at last to face the consequences of a bargain she thought would remain forever hidden. "You have been spreading rumors that threaten Elena's safety," Kieran said, dismounting slowly, his expression carefully neutral, despite the tension radiating from his posture. "I want it stopped, and I want whatever remaining obligation binds her released entirely." Mira's smile widened, cold and calculating. "You want quite a lot, King, for someone offering nothing in return beyond simple demands." "Name your price," Kieran said. "Whatever compensation satisfies you, within reason, I am prepared to offer it." "There is no price that satisfies me for what you are asking," Mira replied, circling slowly around the edge of the clearing, her staff tapping softly against the ground with each measured step. "The magic that freed you required silence and permanence as its foundation. Releasing Elena from that bond would require unraveling the very structure that made your rescue possible in the first place. Are you certain, King, that you wish to risk your own freedom, simply to satisfy your guilt over a debt already fully paid?" Elena felt her stomach drop at the implication, understanding suddenly the true complexity of what they were attempting to negotiate. If breaking her bond somehow reversed the magic that had freed Kieran, they were not simply requesting release from an inconvenient obligation. They were risking the very safety that Elena's original sacrifice had purchased. "There must be another way," Elena said, stepping forward despite the fear tightening her chest. "Some solution that protects what was already given, while still ending the threat of these rumors spreading further." Mira studied her for a long, considering moment, something shifting behind her calculating eyes that Elena could not immediately identify. "Perhaps," the witch said finally, "there exists one possibility. But it will require a choice far more difficult than simply demanding I remain silent, King. And the choice belongs entirely to her, not to you." "Explain the choice," Elena said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear coiling tightly in her chest. Mira circled closer, studying Elena with an intensity that felt like being weighed against invisible scales. "The magic that took your wolf form did not destroy it entirely. It transferred that strength elsewhere, into the very chains that bound the king, dissolving them from within. Your wolf's essence still exists, scattered now through the residue of that broken magic, lingering here in this clearing where the original trade occurred. It could be recalled, gathered back into you, but doing so requires a second sacrifice, equal in weight to the first." "What sacrifice?" Kieran demanded, stepping closer despite Mira's warning glance in his direction. "Not yours to offer," Mira said sharply. "This choice belongs to Elena alone. To reclaim her wolf, she must offer something else in its place, something less visible but equally precious, her memories of these past months, King. Every conversation between you, every quiet moment of growing trust, every recognition of feelings neither of you has fully named aloud. Restoring her wolf would erase her memory of you entirely, resetting her back to the healer's assistant she was before ever stepping foot in your palace. The clearing fell utterly silent, the weight of Mira's words settling heavily over all three of them. Elena felt Kieran's gaze on her, felt the sudden desperate tension in his posture as he processed the impossible choice being placed before her. "No," Kieran said immediately, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "That is not an acceptable trade. Elena, you do not have to choose this. We will find another solution, some other way to protect you without requiring you to forget everything we have built together." "There may not be another way," Mira said, unmoved by his protest. "Magic of this nature rarely offers convenient alternatives, King. The choice remains hers to make, weighing what she values more, the strength and identity she lost, or the connection she has gained in its place." Elena stood frozen between them, the impossible weight of the decision pressing down with crushing force. She thought of her wolf, silent and absent for months now, the hollow ache that greeted her every morning when instinct reached for a form no longer within her reach. She thought of her family, of Owen's careful, worried glances, of the pack traditions and belongings she had sacrificed, without fully understanding the permanence of what she was giving up. Reclaiming her wolf would restore all of that, would return her to the life she had known before, whole and complete, in ways she had not felt since the night of her original trade. Yet she thought, too, of Kieran, of months spent building something rare and precious between them, laughter shared in quiet moments within the healing wing, the fierce protectiveness he had shown since learning the truth of her sacrifice, the raw vulnerability in his voice when he had confessed how deeply she mattered to him. Forgetting all of that meant forgetting him entirely, meant erasing a connection that had grown into something she could no longer imagine living without, regardless of how brief the months of its existence had actually been. "If I choose to reclaim my wolf," Elena said slowly, working through the implications aloud, "what happens to him? To the king's freedom? Does the magic that saved him unravel if I take back what I gave?" Mira considered the question carefully before answering. "The king's freedom remains secure, regardless of your choice. That portion of the magic completed itself the moment he woke free of his chains. What remains uncertain is simply what shape your own life takes moving forward, whole in body but empty of memory, or marked permanently by sacrifice but rich with connection you would otherwise lose entirely." Kieran stepped closer, taking Elena's hands gently in his own, his expression pleading despite his obvious effort to remain composed. "Elena, please, do not choose to forget simply because you believe it might be easier, or because you feel guilty for what our connection has already cost you. Whatever you decide, I want you to choose based on what you actually want for your own future, not on what you believe you owe anyone else, including me." Elena studied his face carefully, memorizing the details in a way she had not consciously done before, the slight crease between his brows when he worried, the warmth that lived permanently in his golden brown eyes despite the weight of his royal responsibilities, the gentle strength in his hands as they held hers now. She thought of the healer's life she had built in the months since her sacrifice, the skills she had developed, the purpose she had found in caring for others even without the strength of her wolf to rely upon. She thought, finally, of the quiet, persistent hope that had grown steadily within her chest since the moment Kieran first noticed her unusual eyes within the healing wing. A hope she was no longer willing to sacrifice, simply because reclaiming what she lost might prove easier than choosing what frightened her more. "I do not want to forget," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I made my sacrifice freely, without expecting anything in return. What has grown between us since then exists entirely separate from that original trade, built through choices we made together, moment by moment, over months of genuine connection. I will not erase that, simply to reclaim a form I have already learned to live without." Mira studied her for a long, silent moment, something unreadable passing across her expression, before she finally nodded slowly. "Then the choice is made, and cannot be revisited. Your wolf remains lost, Elena, permanently woven now into the magic that freed your king. But know this," she added, her tone shifting into something almost gentle, surprising given her earlier coldness. "Sacrifice given freely, without regret, carries its own quiet strength, regardless of what form that strength ultimately takes." "And the rumors?" Kieran pressed, his relief at Elena's decision, tempered by the original purpose of their journey. "Will you cease spreading stories that threaten her safety?" I spread stories because chaos amuses me, and because I wish to test whether either of you possess the courage to face this choice honestly, Mira said, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time since their arrival. Having witnessed that courage firsthand, I find myself satisfied enough to let the matter rest. The rumors will fade, King, unfed by any further encouragement from me. What Callum chooses to do with the fragments he has already gathered remains a problem entirely separate from my involvement. Relief flooded through the small group gathered in the clearing, though Elena understood the danger posed by Callum's ambitions had not fully disappeared, simply because Mira had agreed to step back from the conflict. Still, the most immediate threat had passed, and the choice she had made, difficult as it was, left her feeling lighter than she had in months. Free finally from the fear that her sacrifice might somehow be undone against her will, or exploited by those seeking to weaken Kieran's standing among the packs. The journey back to the palace felt lighter than the road that had carried them toward Mira's clearing, though Elena remained acutely aware that Callum's threat still loomed unresolved ahead of them. True to his earlier warning, rumors of the king's rescue had already begun spreading beyond the palace walls by the time their group returned, distorted and exaggerated in the retelling, painting Kieran as weak and dependent on a human woman for his very survival. Some among the Ashwood pack whispered doubts about his fitness to lead, questions that had never been raised before, now finding fertile ground in Callum's carefully planted seeds of uncertainty. Kieran called a gathering of pack leaders within days of their return, standing before the assembled crowd with Elena at his side, despite Edmund's careful suggestion that her presence might complicate matters further. "I will not hide the truth any longer," Kieran announced, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Yes, I was captured. Yes, my freedom came through a sacrifice made by someone with no obligation to offer it. I do not consider that weakness. I consider it proof that true strength sometimes lives in those willing to give everything for others, expecting nothing in return." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, uncertain and divided, until Elena stepped forward herself, drawing surprised attention as she addressed the gathered pack leaders directly. "I made my choice freely," she said, her voice steady, despite the weight of every eye now fixed upon her. "Not because I sought recognition or reward, but because I believed protecting your king meant protecting all of you. Your homes, your families, everything this kingdom represents. If that choice makes me weak in your eyes, then perhaps strength deserves a different definition than the one many of you currently hold." Her words settled over the crowd, and slowly, gradually, the murmurs shifted in tone, uncertainty giving way to grudging respect among many of the assembled leaders. Not everyone's doubts fully disappeared, and Callum himself remained visibly displeased by the shifting sentiment. But the immediate crisis of confidence Kieran had feared began to ease, replaced by growing recognition that a king surrounded by such loyalty and sacrifice was hardly a king deserving of doubt. Callum approached Kieran privately following the gathering, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. "This is not finished," he warned quietly. "I will find other opportunities to challenge your standing, King." "Perhaps," Kieran replied evenly, "but you will find fewer allies willing to support such challenges, now that the truth stands openly, rather than hidden in shadow for you to twist, however suited your ambitions. Threats built on secrets lose their power once those secrets no longer exist." Callum departed without further argument, though the tension between their packs would clearly require careful management in the months ahead. Elena watched him go, understanding that this particular conflict, born from her own sacrifice, might never fully resolve, but comforted by the knowledge that Kieran now faced such challenges with the truth as his foundation, rather than a secret vulnerability waiting to be exploited. In the weeks that followed, life within the palace gradually settled into a new, steadier rhythm. Elena continued her work in the healing wing, her reputation among the palace staff growing steadily as word of her sacrifice spread, transforming from a source of vulnerability into a symbol of quiet, remarkable courage. Grace traveled from the border village to visit her former student, pride evident in her expression as she watched Elena move confidently through her duties, respected now, not despite her lost wolf form, but because of the strength she had demonstrated in choosing to give it up. Owen visited as well, finally understanding fully the sacrifice his sister had made in secret, his earlier confusion transformed into fierce protective pride. "I did not understand," he admitted during one visit, watching Elena work with practiced efficiency among her patients. I thought you had lost something essential to who you are. I see now that you simply became something different, equally essential in its own way. Kieran's feelings for Elena, no longer hidden behind careful professional distance, grew steadily more open as the months passed, their bond deepening through shared challenges and quiet, ordinary moments alike. He often sought her counsel on matters beyond simple healing, valuing her calm perspective and the steady wisdom she had developed through her work among both wolves and humans within the palace. Their connection, born from an act of anonymous sacrifice and nurtured through months of growing trust, evolved gradually into something neither of them attempted to hide any longer. On a clear evening, months after their confrontation with Mira, Kieran found Elena in the palace gardens, tending quietly to a collection of medicinal herbs she had transplanted from her original village. He watched her for a moment before approaching, struck as always by the quiet strength she carried, evident in every careful, deliberate movement of her hands among the plants. "I have been thinking," he said, settling onto the stone bench beside her, "about strength and what it truly means. I used to believe it lived entirely in claws and speed, in the ability to protect through physical power alone. You taught me otherwise, Elena, without ever intending to teach me anything at all." "What did I teach you?" she asked, smiling despite herself at the unexpected turn in conversation. "That the deepest strength often lives quietly, in choices made without witnesses, in sacrifices offered without expectation of recognition or reward," Kieran said, taking her hand gently in his own. "You gave up your wolf form for a stranger, expecting nothing in return, and in doing so, you became the strongest person I have ever known." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest, no longer accompanied by the fear and uncertainty that had once shadowed every conversation between them. "I did not do it to become strong," she said softly. "I did it because it needed to be done." "I know," Kieran replied, his expression carrying the same warmth she had grown to treasure over the months of their growing closeness. "That is precisely why it mattered so much. Strength given freely, without calculation or expectation, changes everything it touches. It changed me, Elena. It changed the kingdom you helped protect. And somewhere along the way, without either of us fully realizing it was happening, it changed us both into something neither of us could have imagined the night you first walked into Mira's forest clearing." Elena looked up at him, at the golden evening light catching in his eyes, at the genuine, unguarded affection reflected in his expression, and understood finally that the life she had built in the aftermath of her sacrifice, though different from anything she had originally imagined for herself, held its own remarkable richness. She had lost her wolf form that night in the forest, traded away permanently for a stranger's freedom, but what she had gained in its place, the strength of purpose, the deep well of quiet courage she had discovered within herself, and now, this rare and precious connection with a king, who valued her not for what she had lost, but for who she had become, felt worth every sacrifice the choice had demanded. "Whatever comes next," Kieran said quietly, his fingers tightening gently around hers, "I want to face it with you beside me, Elena. Not as gratitude for what you sacrificed, but because somewhere in these months of healing wings and quiet gardens, you became essential to my life, in ways that have nothing to do with debt or obligation." Elena smiled, the warmth of the evening settling comfortably around them both, and understood that whatever challenges still awaited them, from Callum's lingering ambitions to the ongoing work of rebuilding trust among pack leaders, still uncertain about a king who owed his life to sacrifice rather than strength, she would face them exactly as she had faced the choice in Mira's clearing, with clear eyes and an open heart, unafraid of whatever the future demanded, in exchange for the life she had chosen to build. The golden eyes that had once marked her as a stranger among her own people had become, in the end, simply another part of who she was, a permanent reminder of the night courage outweighed fear, and love, quiet and unexpected, found its beginning in the depths of a forest clearing, where a girl with nothing to gain gave everything she had for a king she had never even met.